really the gameplay, almost any gameplay can be relaxing. People calm down with a game of Call of Duty. The person only is relaxing when they're in control of everything. Hi there, welcome to Games Over Coffee Consulting. People give me their games, I give feedback on their game design. My name is Devon, and today we're talking about Tiny Tiles by this name. So typically when people think about game design, they think about systems and such, which is right. You know, game design is mostly about systems. But one of the things that I like to do all the time is to talk about the emotions that you're putting into your game. Even though emotions are subjective for any kind of person who goes to any type of media, be it a movie or a piece of art or a book or whatever, when you're immersing yourself into that media, certain things are put into place to make you feel certain things. So if you have like an action movie, it's made differently than a drama movie. A comedic book is written differently than a dark book. Same thing with video games. There are certain things you can do in your video game to make it feel differently than a different video games. So a lot of times what I'm trying to focus on is the emotion that you're trying to get across to the player, basically, and the type of experience that you want them to have with your game. Games have a type of language that you can use into your design in order to create a certain experience. So a lot of times when I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to go beyond just the systems and go more into the emotion and the type of experience that you want the player to have. What this person said was, I designed the game to invoke a feeling of coziness. I was trying to avoid the concept of challenges so that the player never really feels like they're in competition with either the enemy or the game's developer. That's an interesting observation. I hope I can make the player feel happy about their creation and appreciative of the time that they spent with the game. A specific reaction that I'm aiming for is comfort and being in the moment. Fantastic analysis. So a cozy game is what we're looking for, a cozy type of experience here. I talked about cozy games just one time before, I think. That was with Voyager. Check out the link in the description. Voyager was all about relinquishing control and at the same time taking control. First, let's define what a cozy gameplay is. You can see that the aesthetic of the game is very cozy also. The music you can't hear, but the music is also super relaxing. The aesthetics in the game have all very rounded edges, you know, they have very soft colors. They use lowercase letters in their title of the game. Everything is very cohesive in this idea of it wants to evoke this cozy atmosphere. Whenever I think about cozy gameplay, I think about gameplay that sends the player into a relaxing kind of state. So when you think about your most relaxing type of gameplay, what is it that you're generally doing? For me, it's whenever I'm in total control of whatever it is I'm playing. I'm in total control of the pacing of the game. I'm in control of what I'm doing. All of that. Minecraft immediately comes to mind, but a bunch of other games do too, even competitive ones, but it's because of my control of the game. So the more time that I spend with a game, the more relaxing it feels when I play it. For example, I always fire up Session to relax. Session is a stupidly hard simulator of skateboarding, but it's really relaxing for me because of how much time I've spent with the game. I'm really into skateboarding and I really like the mechanics of skateboarding. So when I'm skating in Session, the idea of me trying to pull off a trick isn't necessarily challenging. It's just something, it's like an exercise. It's like a practice, basically. You could say that with any game. People calm down with a game of Call of Duty, right? And that game is super action oriented. So really the gameplay, almost any gameplay can be relaxing. But the point here that I'm trying to make is that the person only is relaxing when they're in control of everything. Even if you're in a competitive state, the idea that you have so much control over what you're doing is what puts you in a relaxed state, at least interactively. To get that feeling of relaxation immediately when someone logs into your game and they've never played it before, you got to let them have all the control immediately. So that means creating a very low barrier of entry when it comes to the mechanics of your game. Now, Tiny Tiles does have very simple mechanics, but I think there is a little disconnect here. And the disconnect that I'm feeling here is the heavy focus on score. This developer also said in the questionnaire, the thing that they were least proud of in this game was they feel like the scoring might not be achieving the cozy feeling that they're aiming for. And I think they hit the nail on the head. I think that is exactly what's causing this kind of disconnect here. If we look at what the game is trying to do from the very beginning, I think this is the tutorial. I was having a bit of confusion with what the tutorial was because unfortunately in the version that I played, there was no way to turn off the tutorial. Either that or there was no way to turn it on. I'm not sure if what I was seeing was tutorial or not. There's this idea of score. You have these little numbers that represent point values, and then you have a bar that represents filling up to a point value, and then you have a circular bar at the bottom corner of the screen that fills up and then grows your map every time that you go up a level, basically. Everything in the gameplay is shifted toward growing your score. And because that's the case, that means every single thing that you're asking the player to do is contextualized in that manner. Now, it doesn't have to be this way. Like maybe you could just play the game however you want. The weird thing about this game is that it kind of forces strategic play. And the reason why I feel that way is because the way that you play the game is you have a map of tiles that you have to put your tiles onto. The tiles that you're presented with are one at a time. You have to specifically have one tile and switch it in orientation in order to create the most amount of points and put it somewhere on the board. So really the gameplay is funneling the player to create a more strategic decision with every tile that they place. It feels like a strategy game. And in the long run, if the player understands all the mechanics, in the long run, this can become relaxing. And if that's the type of experience that you want from the get-go, you know, a light strategic kind of feel, then that's great. That's perfectly fine. But I didn't really feel relaxed at all when I was playing this game. But of course, if you know me, in tactics games, I kind of get a little stressed out when it comes to tactical placement or strategic gameplay. But I would still say that this game is still pushing a lot of points toward the player and trying to say, hey, get the best score you can, because the gameplay loop in here includes score, right? Score is the thing that the player is playing toward this whole time. And it even ends with the idea of a high score. And even two commenters in your comment section on your profile here posted a screenshot of their completed state, and they said this is the highest score that I got, right? So it's obvious it's in the mind of the player to achieve the highest score possible. And so you can see that you're contextualizing the gameplay to basically get the highest score. You didn't want to produce competition, and that is what I feel here. I'm lightly competitive, trying to get the best score possible. Now, I know it doesn't have to be this way. When you play the game, you don't have to go for the score, but it definitely feels like you should when you're playing the game. Otherwise, your game is kind of cut short. Speaking of score and understanding the game and trying to play it over and over and over, I don't believe this game has that great of a tutorial. And I want to talk about this because of the idea of control. As I said before, when someone steps into your game and they start playing it, if they feel like they're in really good control and they understand everything, then it might become relaxing as they play it, right, as they keep going. I was very, very confused with how this game played, and I could see in some of your comments that a lot of people had kind of the same idea. They didn't really understand what was happening as they played the game. It seems what you were trying to do was trying to put very subtle hints, which I appreciate, but highlighting things and letting people understand what things are by like linking and stuff like that really has to do with interaction and building on what the player already knows versus what they're going to know when they do something. So for example, some of the most obvious inherent gameplay principles that were in like Super Mario Bros, for example, was showing something that was blinking. You have the question blocks, right? So immediately you look at a question mark, it's blinking. It's very different from everything else that's on the screen, and it's above the ground. So that naturally draws your attention and you want to do something with it. And since you already know how to jump in that game because of the first little Goomba that comes over and you jump near the question mark. Since there's two levels, you can try to hit one or try to hit the other. And when you do that, then something happens. You get some feedback. And now you understand that hitting blocks with your head or with your fist does something. That now creates an understanding, and you go throughout the game trying to hit other things with your fist to try to figure out secrets and stuff. So in this game, I didn't feel like the highlighting was doing much for me. I did like the very, very beginning. The very, very beginning I think is great, where you have one little tile square, and that's your whole map, right? The only thing that the player can do is click on the tile, and thus they know, oh yeah, okay, so I'm gonna click on tiles and that's how I place them. Perfect. I think that's great. However, when you're hovering above the tile and it shows a little bar with segments and then a number at the end, this doesn't really mean anything to me as a player because I haven't filled up any bars yet. I don't know what this bar is for, and I don't know what that number is at the end. In fact, the way that this is grouped kind of makes it look like the number at the end is somehow related to the bar, and it is, but not in the way that I would imagine. I imagine that the number represents how many segments there are, or the segments that I can fill up, or the amount of bars maybe, but it's not. It's a point value that you get after filling up the bar. And I feel like this is grouped just kind of weird. The idea of filling up a gauge with like little segments until you get to a certain point value, I think is a good idea, but I think it could be explained maybe a little bit better. Instead of having the player hover over a portion and showing that bar already filled up, they need to have some sort of basis of understanding first. So I think maybe clicking on that tile first and then showing the segments fill up after they've clicked on it would let them know that they're doing something, and then maybe do it again, but this time have a point value at the end so that when it fills up, then they attach points. Then the player understands that they fill up the bar by clicking a tile, and then they fill up the bar to the end to get a point value. And then that point value is then added to the bigger point value at the end. There's a lot of other things with this game that I did not understand, and I had to keep playing in order to understand. The segmented bars have different types of segments depending on what type of tile that you're putting down. The point values go up as you put more tiles down, and some tiles are inherently more valuable than other tiles. And when you connect a certain amount of tiles, then they stop gathering points and you have to go to a different area to start more points. I'm going to go a little bit theory here, and I apologize, but this is just what I'm feeling here when I'm looking at this game. When I first played this game, I felt like everything that was being explained to me didn't need to be explained. Not because I got it, not because I understood, but because I felt like the things that were explained should just be part of the background. I felt like it was something that I really didn't need to understand. I felt like it would probably feel better if I just started placing tiles and I got points for stuff, and then I would connect in my mind later that placing these tiles gives me points. Really quickly, hi, Devon from the future here. I was trying to figure out why I wanted to say that this game should do away with those little bars and little point values and stuff. I think the thing that I was trying to work toward was this idea of using intuition to introduce the score. If we look at what's known as flow theory for game design, flow theory has this kind of X and Y chart. It's the amount of challenge versus the amount of skill that a player has. If the player has a high amount of skill and a low amount of challenge, then that makes it a relaxing experience, as opposed to a medium amount of skill, which makes you bored, or a low amount of skill, which makes you apathetic. So I was trying to think about that, and I was thinking, what increases the player's skill a whole lot in a game without increasing the challenge a lot? And the way you do that is just by playing the game over and over and over and over. And that seems to be the reason why games always get more relaxing the more that you play them, because it's not as challenging as it was the first time you played it, and you've built up a whole lot more skill since then. So I was trying to think of a way to design for that. How do you design for the player to have a whole lot of skill when they have never played the game before? And I think what you have to do is you basically have to think about the difficulty curve, but think about it exponentially. Think about how the player starts off with no skill, then builds up a little bit, then a ton, right? Exponential curve. And I think the way that you do this is by building on preconceptions that the player already has. For example, in a game like Flower, the controls are very intuitive in that game. When you're playing with the control sticks or playing with the mouse, it's very easy to understand where it is that you're going. And because the challenge is so low, the approach is very intuitive. So the idea here is that if you build on something that the player already understands, then the skill that they have gets way higher, way faster. In a game like Gone Home, for example, it's not a very skill-heavy game, but first-person controls are required to understand how the game works. And because players pretty much already know how to play first-person games when they play this game, then it takes very little effort, and your skill is very, very high when you begin the game, thus making it a pretty relaxing experience because there's not a whole lot of challenge in that game. So the way that I would do it with tiny tiles is to somehow use graphic design principles to make the player understand how much certain tiles are worth. Maybe without any bars included, a person could understand that taking out a desert tile and connecting it to another desert tile lets them get points versus ones that don't. And perhaps they change appearance when you connect more of them together, kind of like Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, how they all connect to each other. Maybe they change a little bit of their appearance, thus giving the player an understanding that something else has changed. But just having those subtle graphic design changes, I think, could really make a big difference on the player understanding how the points work without having to explain like with little bars or anything like that. That's just what came to mind. Then they would start to understand that there's certain tiles you can put down to create bigger points than others, and they would start to make connections themselves as opposed to having all of this up front. I know this kind of flies in the face of my idea of information heavy gameplay, that the idea is, having direct control over everything. But if you think about the feeling, the way that the player feels when they play the game, the player feels like they're in absolute control when they click on a tile and they place it, and they keep clicking tiles and placing them and getting points. Like, that's everything that they understand, and that's everything they need to know. That feels like pretty good control to me. I feel like that would be way more relaxing than me trying to strategize every single move that I have, because I have bars that I need to fill up and I have to make sure, okay, maybe I should click it in this orientation, maybe I should do this one. But of course, that is just theory. That's how I feel that this game could do better, I think, to make that cozy feeling and still have points in play. You also mentioned that you wanted the player to feel like a completeness, like a finality to everything. And really, I feel like that's here already. The idea of having the game of having the map fully completed and then you have a score, I really did feel like I did something, that I've created a piece that I was proud of. You have to think about the type of experience that you're trying to portray here, and I feel like the experience that you're giving is a very specific type of experience. Like, you have to imagine exactly what you're doing with the player and what each decision means. For example, in the very beginning, you have a very small map, and then that map grows when the player gets enough points. And in order to get enough points, you're providing the player with one single tile that they must place in a certain strategized orientation. And once they complete that, then they're given the next tile that they have to complete in another strategized orientation, and then complete that over and over so that they grow a map bigger and bigger. It really does feel like a strategy game at that point. And maybe try experimenting with some of this stuff. If you were to give the player just a tile set completely, right, all at once, just give them all the tiles and then let them build whatever they want. See if they can grow a certain amount of points within that area, or maybe just give them one tile at a time and let them discard when they're done. Maybe they don't want to place that tile, and so they trade it in for a different tile. Or maybe you have a place where there's a bunch of already placed tiles, and the idea is to try to optimize the placements that you have. There's different ways that you can do this, and I know obviously that you were going for a very specific type of experience, but I'm thinking maybe experiment with these a little bit more just to see how it feels and to see how it plays out differently. I would really like to see how this game plays without the scoring system at all. If you could email me when you fix that tutorial button to see if you can turn off the tutorial, I would really like to see how this game plays upon just not having a tutorial at all, or even like a score at all. I'd really like to see how that plays, so I'd be really interested in that. If you're not already part of the Discord, check it out. I certainly have my point of view on these games, but it's only one point of view. The Discord has a bunch of point of views, so it's really helpful to have developers go into the Discord and get a much more rounded opinion of their game, because I certainly have my own view of them, but it is only one, and I feel like it's better if you have multiple viewpoints. So check out the Discord if you want to try other games or just talk with other developers or whatever. I'm in there all the time. So thank you so much. I think that's about all I have to say today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you guys later.